Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to this National Housing Federation webinar. My name is Catherine Ryder, and I'm the Director of Policy and Research at the NHF. I'm delighted that so many of you have joined us on this webinar today. We're going to be discussing the role of housing associations as anchor institutions and how the sector can support local economies through community wealth building. Today, I'm really excited to say we've launched the CLERS and NHF Toolkit, which outlines how housing associations can contribute to local economies as community anchors. We hope through this webinar you'll be inspired about the role the sector can play in supporting social and economic recovery in the communities we serve. In 2019, the Great Places Commission reported its 10 recommendations for creating great places to live. They identified a huge opportunity for housing associations to embrace community wealth building. The toolkit we've released today explores how housing associations can do that, with bundles of practical advice and insight. We're launching it now to coincide with the Homes at Heart campaign, celebrating the role of housing associations in supporting prosperous communities and social and economic recovery through the ongoing coronavirus. We've got 2, possibly 3 fantastic speakers who are going to offer you their insight and expertise today. Please take full advantage of their time. They're here to inspire you, but also take any questions you've got. We've got Neil McInroy from CLERS, who's going to talk through housing associations as anchor organisations. We've got Bill Lovett, the Regional Director from Agenda, who's going to discuss anchor institutions in action. And we're also hoping to be joined today by Sian from Community Gateway Preston, who's going to talk through their approach to community investment and the impact of those investments. We're having some technical difficulties getting Sian onto the webinar at the moment, so it may be that we're not joined by her today, in which case we'll have a little bit more time with our 2 other fantastic speakers. We'll hear from each of our speakers in turn, and then we'll have lots of time for your questions. I'd also like to thank L&Q and Rochdale Borough-wide Housing, who also provided case studies for the toolkit. Before we get started, I'd like to welcome James in our digital team and Becca, our events manager, who will be helping me in the event of any technical glitches with today's webinar. If this is your first go-to webinar, there are a couple of things to look out for on your dashboard. You can close the panel using the red arrow so you can see more of the speakers and the presentations. And if you've got any issues with sound, please check the audio tab. Please take the opportunity to ask questions throughout the webinar. You can do this in your question tab in the GoToWebinar dashboard. We'll take questions throughout the session and we'll try and get through as many as we can in the Q&A at the end. We'll be sending all attendees an email over the next week, which will include a link to the recording of this webinar. The slides from today's session will also be available to download. Everybody who joins today's webinar will get a copy of our toolkit. We're also looking for partner housing associations, which we can bring together to share best practice as part of a community of practice. If you're interested in joining that community, please contact eam@housing.org.uk to get involved. That is more than enough for me for now, so I'm now going to hand you straight over to Neil, our first speaker.
Good, thanks Catherine, and good afternoon everyone. Delighted to be here as a launch of this Housing Associations Anchor Institutions. I work at the Centre for Local Economic Strategies with the National Housing Federation, and it's great if you could sign up to the communities of practice around this agenda, which is growing as part of a wider community wealth building agenda. And I'm a little bit of a fraud here, sitting here today, and as the Chief Executive of CLERS, I've had not as much to do with this work as others, and Fran Jones has most work to do with it, and she's now on maternity leave, as well as Joe Billsborough. So thanks to them, as well as all our colleagues at NHF. It's worth just mentioning the moment we're in this pandemic, and the idea that we're in a linear crisis where there's a beginning, a middle, and an end. And I think we should assume, because of the climate emergency and because of the huge cathartic paradigm moment that this pandemic is inducing upon us, this is not a linear moment of a middle, a beginning, an end. It's a roller coaster we're in now, a closed roller coaster, a loop with moments of intense pain and worry, and then it'll ease somewhat. And so we need to see, I think, the role of housing associations, public bodies, and the wider economy is going through a paradigm shift, and we need to break out that loop, and we need to build a new economy altogether, a new society altogether. And housing associations will have a role in that. So this is not the old world, this is a new world we're moving into. Next slide, please, James. CLES are a think, do tank. We've been going for 35 years with the UK Organisation for Local Economies, Progressive Economics, People, Place, Planet. And in a sense, simply, we want the economy to work for our people, for our communities, for our places. And in that is the implication that it isn't. And I think that was before this pandemic, and it certainly is true now as we go to a reset and make a transition to a new economy. Next one, please, James. Just to frame this work, this housing association as anchor institutions, let's talk about community wealth building, which is the movement that's fast growing across the UK and the world. And this comes from a recognition that we've got a wealth problem. We always talk about poverty as a problem, but actually, let's turn that on its head. It's a wealth problem. We've got wealth which is too readily held by too few people in too few places. The 5 richest families in the UK own the same amount of wealth as 13.2 million of us. And the 9 richest men in the world own the same amount of wealth as half the population of the world. Wealth is all around us, but unfortunately not enough of us can get their hands on it. And so on one hand, we're building skyscrapers, or did build skyscrapers. On the other hand, we have homelessness has reached a record high in the UK with more than 170,000 families and individuals living in difficulty. So we have a wealth problem. And what community wealth building is about is to say, quite simple, it's economic plumbing. Let's plug the leaks, make sure that wealth flows through our people, our communities, and our streets and our places. And let's make sure we build reservoirs and places where that wealth can be captured. So in simple terms, it's saying, let's try and reduce the amount of the economy is driven by shareholders or the shareholder supremacy. Let's make sure wealth isn't extracted beyond these shores. Let's make sure that when economic growth or growth occurs, it flows through in terms of wages and jobs and local enterprise. And let's make sure we've got the right receptacles, the right financial architecture, the right institutions who are recipients of that wealth and make an economy work effectively for people and communities. So that's in essence what community wealth building is about. And in that, next slide please, James. In that, anchors are key. And all you out there, or most of you be from housing associations, you are part of an anchor organisation. You're part of a housing association, and you are key ballast in the economy. You are what's called sticky capital. Yeah, you are an economic. You're not going anywhere. A lot of the work you do, and we'll hear from Community Gateway and Regenda later, they do work in communities. They're not going anywhere. They're not leaving Bolton. Are you, Bill? You're not leaving Bolton. Yeah, you're not leaving where you have your stock and where you have a relationship to. So you're sticky. You're also an economic. You buy stuff. You employ people. You own land and property, and you have a vested interest in the surrounding communities and places. You are relational players in the economy, not just transactional players that are there to make a buck and then go away to the Cayman Islands. You're there to stick, and you're there to stay, and you're there to make that place work for your own organisation, but also for everybody else that relates to it, including your tenants and your workers. And so we're interested in those anchor institutions, housing providers being one, and we have the communities of practice all for housing associations. We also have one for universities and one for the health sector, as well as local authorities, police, as other anchors. So the collective heft of all those anchors in place represents significant amount of economic agency and economic power. And we know, typically in terms of public sector, it could be worth up to, in London, it's about 30% of the whole economy is driven by the public sector. In places like Bolton, it may be a little bit higher, maybe up to 40%. But between 25 and 40% is typical in terms of public sector and to the economy. Let's think how we make that power, that economic work well. Now, community wealth building looks across, next one please, James. Community wealth building looks across this power of anchors. And here is a range of places we are working with at the moment. It's worth just noting them because a lot of you will be involved in housing associations in those places. And if you're not involved in the community wealth building activities, you should be getting on your local authority and saying you should be getting involved. The ones in green are the ones where I think you will be involved, hopefully, because these are ones where housing associations are definitely woven in that I know of. There's a few others that I've not flagged up there, Oldham particularly are as well. So a growing movement in place with this collective endeavour of these anchors seeking to turn the dial on making sure wealth flows through our streets, flows through our communities, flows in the pockets of people, and counteracts an economy that's going wrong, a market capitalism that's going wrong, if you like, where wealth is too readily extracted. Next one, please, James. And to think about this, and this is where we come to the report. Here we are. Yeah, my printed out copy. We start to explore this from a housing association perspective across 5 key pillars, the key pillars of action. And I explain a little bit of that from a housing perspective. And we split the work up in that way across these 5 pillars. The financial resources you have, the land and property you have, the spending power that you have, the workforce you have, and then this wider one, generative economy, the wider ownership models in the economy that I'll come on to and explain in a moment. Now, generally, you're all probably thinking, well, we know we've been anchor organisations forever. We've been doing this for years. You know, we are anchor institutions. Well, look, I admit you are. You've been a beacon of being an anchor institution for many years. You're fantastic players, and there's some of the figures. You employ 150,000 people. You've got assets worth 155 billion collectively. You've got 70 million pound worth of programme. But this work with NHF, it's celebrating some of that, but it's also saying, hold on here, we need to go even further and deeper. How do we increase the intent across those 5 areas I mentioned to actually do more of this community wealth building? And in this work, you'll find a range of case studies, as well as a range of key questions you should be asking yourselves as regard, how do I become more of an anchor? So next one, please, James. On those 5 anchors, next one, James. On those 5 anchors, the first one is making financial power work for local places. Now, despite reductions in funding, housing associations continue to directly fund a range of local organisations. It's the next one, please, James. That's it. You collaborate with local credit unions. You are involved, including the Community Gateway, progressing the formation of community-owned banks. You're directing investments towards projects that benefit local people. You get all this, yeah? You are creating a, what would you call it, a resilient financial architecture as much as you can to nurture and cradle communities, to ensure that investments come forward that are community type investments, and you're locking wealth in to some extent. You need to scale that up, and there's details in the report how to do that. Use patient capital to help build local economy more, to localise things more, to work more with community involved sector, to go the next mile, because this pandemic and the crises that are following, and require that up in the ante wherever you can. That's the first pillar. The second pillar of action, next one please, James, is about workforce, employment and just labour markets. You are significant employers, but scaling up those activities are key. Recruiting from lower income areas, paying the living wage, building progression routes for workers, maximising employment and training opportunities. Growing apprenticeships, these are all key elements, which I know you're doing. It's up in the ante on this. And just to say, it's not all upon you. Community wealth building is a growing movement, and we're hoping that within other jurisdictions and contexts, the context can change for you. And as an example of that, I've recently been part-time seconded to the Scottish Government to advance community wealth building across Scotland. And in that, that looks at the wider policy frame for which we can allow fertile soil conditions for housing associations to play more of a community wealth building role in the localities they're in. In fact, I was with Berwickshire Homes yesterday. Sorry if I got the name wrong, but Berwickshire Housing Association. The third area, next one please, James, is plural and democratic ownership of the economy. Now this one is key element of your role, and perhaps one that's maybe not has been a big feature in the past. This is considering how do you act as a catalyst to grow different forms of ownership models in the economy, CICs, community businesses, social enterprises, cooperatives. If you have more of these entities in an economy, more likely wealth will stick, because a co-op will not be registered in the Cayman Islands. Yeah, and if a small local enterprise makes a buck, and that woman or male owner of that business makes a buck, they're not going to tend to go shopping in New York. They'll invest their money in that local business and keep that money circulated in. So ownership matters. Now, you and yourself are a democratic owned organisations, but how do you look at your supply chain to encourage more of your supply chains that comes from those inclusive ownership forms, co-ops, mutuals, CICs, and so on? Next one, please, James. And that gets us on to the procurement activities. You are already on this game in terms of social value and so on, and you've got significant procurement budgets. I think 218 housing associations spend 3.8 billion a year on maintenance, or 3.5 billion a year on maintenance. That's a lot of money. And who's getting those contracts? And are those contractors paying a living wage? Are those contractors cooperatives? Are those contractors looking after the environment with net zero carbon policies? These are so important that you do that and do as much as you can with it. Also, I would say housing associations need to do more on developing supply. How do you develop the market so you have more of those entities being fit to bid for the contracts? You are market shapers, not just market entrants. You should be shaping the market that is more virtually, socially and economically virtuous. And finally, your land and property holdings. I said before, you've got combined assets of over 150 billion, and you spend 17 billion a year on new homes. I think you need to think about how you use that land, not just in other land that's not being used. How do you use that for rewilding? How do you look for other forms of productive use? How does one use it for community ownership? Different models so that we counteract some of the wealth extraction from land and property appreciation that so bedevils much of our country. Last one, please, James. So that's finally the report's there, and read it. You're part of a movement. You always have been part of this community wealth building movement. You're now a more secure part of this movement. I'd love to hear some feedback out of NHF on this report. Use it, abuse it, do what you want with it. Look at those local areas that we're doing community wealth building in, and make sure you make that connections, and do come on board and find out more information about the communities of practice. That's all from me from now. I hope that was interesting to you, and I'm going to pass you over to Bill now from Regenda. Bill.
Neil, I think we're actually going to hear from Sean next, who I am absolutely delighted has managed to join us. So I think Sean's slides come next, so we'll hand over to Sean, and then we'll hear from Bill at the end. Brilliant, thank you. Over to you, Sean.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. My name's Sian Colton. Apologies for my lateness. I was early, but technical difficulties, but I'm on. So, like I say, my name's Sian. I'm the Community Engagement Manager at Community Gateway Association, based in Preston. I've actually only been with Community Gateway for just over a year now, but I've worked within community engagement, development, regeneration within the housing sector for the last 13 years. So been involved with lots of different projects, initiatives based on community wealth building. But just to give you a bit of background about Community Gateway and who we are and what we do. We're based in Preston. We were established in 2005. And we're the first housing association set up as a gateway model. So we're a community-based housing association who own and manage over 6,500 properties and provide families for over 10,000 people in and around Preston. The majority of our stock is based in the Preston area. One of our guiding principles, though, is really to support and empower local communities, and that's where not just only my team, the whole of the organisation come into play. We really believe that in order to help develop and thrive as a housing association, we're really well rooted and anchored and recognise that we've got a role to play in doing this. We are a number of one anchor institutes operating within the Preston area, and we're actively involved in a number of different community wealth building initiatives as part of the Preston model. Community Gateway ourselves, we focus on a couple of areas, and I know Neil's touched on a few of them in his presentation. Probably all of them I've only joined partway through, so apologies. But one of the two areas we've really focused on over the last few years is fair employment and progressive procurement. We always want to get the best person for any job, but we really truly believe that Preston has got lots of talent locally. I'm actually from Preston myself and live locally, and we've got 80% of our workforce that are based in the local area, and we've got a KPI around this because we feel so strongly about it. Over the past few years, we have pursued an insourcing strategy, and we've brought our property maintenance and our grounds maintenance service in-house, so creating more opportunity for local people. And when we do need to outsource, we will look to local contractors first. And we've seen real benefit of this, not just for the local economy, but for ourselves. One example is where we used a contractor to do some work for us, and from lighting work, we then asked them back in to help out at one of our subsidiaries, Preston Vocational Centre, to do some more work there. Preston Vocational Centre is a real community-based asset, and they deliver vocational training in construction for young people who don't typically do well within the normal educational environment, but obviously like to do that more hands-on learning. Because the contractor was locally based, they actually learnt about what we did at the centre, and they offered to do the work for free as part of their social value offer. But more so in that, and what's even better, is they now offer apprenticeship opportunities to the young people coming through the centre. So it really shows how that partnership work can benefit everybody involved. So obviously, as an anchor institute within Preston, we work very closely with a number of our different partners from across the cities and the other anchor institutes. We lead a number of different partnership meetings, and we're actively involved wherever we can be to help bring improvements and combat issues locally. Through the pandemic, though, we obviously saw a real change within our local communities, and they faced a number of different issues. We used our digital engagement platforms to really keep in touch with our tenants and our communities, and to really get some insight into how they were feeling and what they were struggling with. And we used that information to really tailor the service and the support that we delivered during this time. Like a lot of places nationally, it soon became really apparent that people were struggling financially, unemployment had risen, people were also struggling to access food. And these weren't just people that were vulnerable and shielded, and these were families with young children at home. So we worked alongside a number of the other anchor institutes as well as our wider partnership, and we led on a couple of projects which I just wanted to share with you today, really just to show community wealth building in action. Next slide, please, James. So the first initiative we did, and I haven't put loads of information on the slides, but I'm just going to talk you through it, was Kids in the Kitchen. Like I say, a lot of our families were struggling financially to access food. We also found that they were really struggling with the children being at home from school. They were having to feed them more, which had a cost associated to it, but also keep them entertained. Children were getting bored, the longer lockdown went on. One partner who we've worked with for a number of years is the Larder. They're a social enterprise that are based in Preston. They are really committed to providing healthy, nutritional food, source everything locally, no wastage, and they really like to deliver community initiatives. And all the way throughout the pandemic, they were delivering food to community members. With the feedback we received from our tenants and residents throughout Preston, we had a conversation with the Larder, and we created Kids in the Kitchen. What Kids in the Kitchen was an online cookery programme, in essence, for families to take part in. So we promoted the scheme on all of our social media channels and through our partners, and people could sign up for it. And what the Larder did is they sourced local ingredients and produce and parcelled them up, along with recipe cards that their team of volunteers, as well as our colleagues at Community Gateway, went out and delivered. Each day then, as part of the programme, we uploaded a video which was like a step-by-step guide with our colleagues at the Larder, showing them how to make home-cooked meals that they could then all enjoy together as a family. This was really, really successful. Not only did it give them access to fresh food and they were eating well, it also brought them together as a family and gave them a positive activity to enjoy during a really challenging time. We did this initially in April as part of what would have been Easter half term, and we had then 36 families take part. We then did another one-off as part of the big lunch, because we always like to celebrate our communities via the big lunch, and we did pizza making, which 63 families took part in. We then ran a 6-week programme over summer where 81 families took part in. So you'll see on the screen some of the quotes and some of the pictures of the children in action. The feedback's just been fantastic. They've tried different foods. It's kind of given them a new interest and brought them together as a family. And we are going to we are going to look to progress this for October half term, but also to reach out to more of our community members. Next slide, please, James. So another initiative that we've just finished delivering, and it's been a big one, is our uniform bank. I'm really lucky to have a team that are really kind of proactive and very passionate about what they do, and they're really in tune with what our community's needs are. So before COVID hit, we'd had many discussions about the struggles and the barriers that some of our tenants and residents face in accessing items for children. Children are expensive, activities are hard, you know, to afford, and school uniform and everything that goes with that can be a big cost. And obviously, with the financial worries, as we got closer to the schools reopening, that worry for our tenants and residents really came through, and not just with ourselves, but our partners. We therefore set up a uniform bank. It's been a really busy few months delivering it, but we decided that we really wanted to do something to help people, but this wasn't just for our tenants, it was for anyone living within the Preston area. So we started off by accepting donations, so we advertised it throughout Preston, and we got over 1,700 items of donated uniform, and we got some really good quality stuff. Some of it was brand new, the children had only been in school a few months. So we took all the uniform and made sure it was all professionally cleaned. We then opened up referrals into the project. Now the referrals came from our partners to make sure those people really in need were able to access it, but we also let people self-refer into it. And you'll see on there some of the figures and the amount of people that we helped, but we also gave away some new items. So we secured £5,000 in external funding from the Lancashire COVID Fund, as well as £2,500 from our own community fund, just so we could top up the items we were giving out. So, you know, we believe that every child, if they needed it, should have some clean, brand new socks and white shirts where possible. So we used the money to do that. We also brought things like PE kits for those people that were really struggling, or branded items for certain schools, but we gave the majority of high school children new pencil cases, and primary school children lunch boxes as well. Next slide, please, James. So we're just working on the impact of this, but the overall arching figures of it, obviously you can see in there, is that we supported 308 families during this, and that's 534 children benefiting from the uniform banking from the donations. We had a team of volunteers, as well as my team working day in, day out to turn it around. We are working, as you see in there, there's a few kind of stats and figures and pictures and quotes. We are producing a video to really demonstrate that impact and show what difference it's made. So if you're not following Community Gateway on social media, please do so, and we'll be sharing that on that platform soon. But as you can see on there, 92% of individuals who accessed our uniform bank said it was down to affordability issues. 34% said they would have just gone into debt to get items, and 19% usually relied on help from friends and family, but were struggling to do so this year. And you'll see there, which is quite sad really. One family stated that actually they just wouldn't send the children back to school until September 2021 because they just could not have afforded it to buy all the items to send them into school with. So yeah, that's another example, which is quite a recent one, and one that we're looking at how we can sustain going forward, because it's obviously really in need within the local area. Next slide, please, James. So finally, just kind of just wanted to touch on this one really, and this has really been led on by our tenancy support team, but supported by the whole of Community Gateway. Obviously, as the pandemic hit, the biggest and the main focus for everybody was the response to the food crisis. And we worked with the local council, obviously, alongside them as an Anchor Institute, to really look at that emergency response and how we could support them to do that. We very soon learned that we need to set up our own food hub to just help them manage the demand on the service. So we worked in partnership with FareShare and James Hall Limited, which are the local food suppliers, and we created our own food hub and used our colleagues to deliver food parcels to our tenants, and also some non-tenants where we supported our partners if they had service users who were in need. So you'll see there we delivered 9,050 bags of food in total in over 17 weeks. And we also did some extra food provision in Preston, but also in Blackpool and Blackburn. We got excess food and we just made sure that wasn't wasted. So we made sure that we supported our partners across the city and the surrounding areas to deliver theirs. And we are now looking at sustaining this as restrictions have decreased. Well, they're back up in Preston actually at the moment, but as we started stepping away from that, we still felt that there was a real need for this food support. People were really struggling to buy fresh food, good food, healthy food. So we've set up a Purple Pantry, and that's just finished its 7-week pilot, which is a community-based membership supermarket where tenants and non-tenants and even our colleagues can pay a membership fee and go to the supermarket and access really good quality items. These are branded items. These are really, a full selection at a real reduced rate. And so far to date, we've had 896 households visit the pantry over the first 7 weeks, and 79% of those people have been our tenants, but obviously that shows you the amount of non-tenants accessing that service as well. So as we move forward, we've got a corporate plan and a community empowerment strategy whereby community wealth building really does sit at the heart, and we're really linked into what's going on across Preston and working with our partners to really build strong and cohesive communities that are resilient. We always say we want communities where people want to live, and that's what we're striving to achieve for everything we do. Okay, so that's everything from me. Again, apologies for my lateness, but I will pass over to Bill now.
Okay, thanks for that. I'm glad to see there's some cakes in the food delivery, by the way, not to be forgotten. I thought I'd just include a little tribute slide just for people to check out the Claire's website. It's just a little screenshot of one of their many educational videos, yes? And I thought it summarized a lot of the things many of us might be interested in at the moment, reflect some of our actions, so a good thing. Let's skip on to the main thing, enough Claire's tribute for now. Next slide, please. Yeah. We're talking about Regenda. So I'm Bill Lovett, by the way, Regional Director for Regenda, based in Oldham, actually, Greater Manchester and Cheshire's my patch. Been there quite a while. And I want to reflect the sort of organisation that we're a part of. We're a Northwest Association working across there. And we're a group. So there's a number of companies in the group. But I think we've certainly reviewed what we're about in the last few years and got a very clear mission statement there. We regenerate places. That's what we're about. That's what the whole group is about. And we'll look to see how we do that. So in this set of slides, I'll be looking at one part of what we do as an organisation. And that central objective is about skills, life chances, careers, also aspiration, and obviously education and training amongst that. We try and lead through that. So I'm going to talk about an example. I think as a sector, we do absolutely great stuff. If you look across our practice, look at Community Gateway, I think probably everybody on this webinar can probably think of some great examples. And I think we've got to have a look at those again, learn from them, look at the key strengths and points, and have a think, because I think we need to reassess and recalibrate, exactly as Neil was talking about, just as the report's talking about. What are we going to be doing next? I think we've got some challenges to face. Next slide, please. So this is the example, and I think we've got a pretty good track record here, working on employment and skills. Regenda as an organisation, Regenda Homes, lots of partners there. We've worked for a long time around creating employment and skills opportunities for our local residents. I think this one has a little bit of different method that's worth a look. So we've flagged this one up a little bit as a slightly different approach, because what we've done is work with partners more collaboratively. We've tried to co-design a response. This is in Oldham. It's in Hollandwood Ward. you can look it up. It's a marvellous place. It's where we've got our office. But it's always had challenges around educational opportunity, and particularly NEET, young people not in education and employment and training. And that's something that continues now. So what we did there was we brought, in a sense, a new collaboration together. We looked at the data, we looked at how we might tackle it more effectively than we had done before, so that we could really see some impact and some change. So we worked closely with schools in a different way, looking at what they need in terms of progress. And we took a preventative and an interventionist approach, bit of a strategy. We worked with the 14 to 16 age range in a school, a local academy, to do some preventative work, because you want to stop this problem happening. You want to give people better life chances. And we also engaged with some local young people, 16 to 19. About 61 on a pilot. We've worked with 90 or so children since March, thereabouts, and we've had good impact in terms of feedback. You know, that's important. So I think working with partners has always been our strength. I think it's our strength as a sector, but we particularly always work through new collaboration, partnerships, new arrangements, and we redesign them to really focus on some outcomes and some impact. And as I've said there, I think it's still the case, investing in the success of young people, improving their chances of success, that's got to be a powerful creator of wealth for the individual, for the community, for the wider setting. I've included a wee Twitter link there just to show how social media savvy I am. I don't know if you can click on that. Not now, it'll ruin the presentation. But the school we work with is Oasis Academy. They have a chain of 52 academies across the country, 30,000 pupils. And they do some excellent mission stuff. We work with their community hub. That link there shows their sort of head of Oasis Academy nationally, talking about the widening gulf. It was a report in the Times Ed supplement last week or so. The widening gulf. There was already a huge gap in terms of opportunity and outcomes for the financially disadvantaged in our community. We all know this, don't we? And what we've got to be more aware of at the minute, I think, which is where our challenge comes from, is that gap has widened significantly over the last 6 months, and it's going to increase. That's not a particular prediction. I think it's a direction of travel. So one to look at and one for us to reflect on. Great illustration. We could have hundreds of these. There's some useful methodology there, I think, which is worth a look, and we need to reflect on how we go forward. Next slide, please. This is just a little bit about how we're tackling our capacity as a wealth creating organisation. It's gone a bit beyond the normal setup. So we've got a training provider in our company now. It does apprenticeships, it does traineeships. It can help us with capacity to deliver adult learning. It'll do something with the Kickstart programs, etc., etc. But that's going to be built up for a while. Help us deliver more effectively. We also have a charity as part of the group, which works with primary age school children in terms of giving them some real career awareness, aspirations, and really kickstarting their awareness of opportunities in life. That's a bit different as well. But the thing I'd stress, which links to how we're rethinking our partnership work, it links to the case study I've talked about. It's right within Oldham, Thriving Holland Wood, a new partnership, I think, working closely with the council approach to place-based working within the Greater Manchester context of approach to place-based working, because we've got to keep renewing and reflecting on how we do that and why and what we're driving. Are we really creating wealth or just lots of meetings? There's some challenge there, and that's a link to our broader impact report. Loads of partners involved in that, by the way, too many to mention. I'll mention Onward Homes because they really contributed strongly to that as well, but there's loads more. Next slide, please. Loads of other project examples we could give. That last one was about arts and community. I think I'll end with a slide with some cheerful people on. Not like me, a bit more upbeat, a bit more positive. A great team, which is one of those magic ingredients. You can't always just pick out that sort of strength. The challenge is, how are we supporting the communities we serve? How are we interpreting that in the the challenges ahead. I think it can't be just more of the same. I think we've got to look at how we're going to drive wealth creation in an economic downturn. It's very much about partnership for us. Ask what your partners are doing. We're working very closely with Oldham Council. I think councils around the region have got some real innovation, have got some drive. Ask what they're doing and participate in their work on resilience, on recovery, on their strategic plans. We're working with some great partners at the minute right now that have a new approach about social enterprise development, establishing a framework in a number of boroughs in Greater Manchester to allow social enterprises to thrive. And I've given another link there to one of our excellent partners, Upturn Enterprise, a long-standing social enterprise partner. And I'd also mention, which I think is another important development, which they all link to the pillars, these, by the way. This is about local ownership of assets and resources. We're spending a fair bit of time looking at how we develop community-led housing, project, investment, action. We're actually working ourselves with GMCVO and with Resonance, which is a national social impact investor, to really generate some locally controlled, owned assets, resources, housing, leisure facilities. So big chunk of work, and we've made some real commitments there. So I hope that reflects some of that. I'll end with a little snapshot though. Look, I'm not quite done yet. This is the bit where the cheerful team will be sad, because we're doing some great work in Holland Wood on tackling needs and youth unemployment. I checked the figures, well, you know, in the last day or so. It's just a scale of challenge thing that we all need to address, really. And the unemployment rate for that ward in Holland Wood is now 24%. You know, the unemployment in the borough has doubled, and we have hardly started yet on experiencing the economic impact of what we've seen. And some of that will stay. I would add as well the youth unemployment level in Holland Wood ward, 31.7 within our estate. Okay, 24.7 for the ward, but on our estate, where our residents and tenants and young people live, 31.7. We've got a bit to do. So I think we're all going to be challenged to look, and I think we've got to be creative, work together, collaborate, build on what practice. We're good at it. We're going to have to be excellent. Thank you very much.
Thank you all. 3 fantastic and really timely presentations, and quite a sobering note to end on there, Bill, as to why some of this is so important and the difference that it can make to people's lives. I'm really pleased that Sian, you could join us. Sorry about the stresses of getting on, but absolutely great to hear from you and your experience as a Community Gateway organisation. We've got some questions that have come in from the audience, and we've got a little bit of time, so we're just going to work our way through them. And I think I can tell just by the questions that are coming through that people really have been inspired by your experience, and Neil, the kind of structure that you've put behind this, which I think will help people really see how they can get involved and the potential for them. I'm going to start with quite a broad question, if that's okay, and I'm just going to put this to the whole panel. What's your advice for an organisation starting out as a community wealth builder? What would you suggest that people do first? I don't know who wants to start on that one. Does anyone want to come in? Bill, do you want to come in? You look like you're reaching for the mute button.
I was going back for my vodka bottle, but I'll put that down now. It's water. It's honestly. I think that's a really important question, and it's partly what I was referring to. We've got strengths. We've got to look at them. How do they apply? I think we've got to look at our partnerships, who we're working with, what's our network, and we're going to have to redesign and rebuild some of those. And I think we've got to look at the opportunities and ideas that are there. I've talked about social enterprise and rebuilding or developing a new framework. The expertise is out there with our partners and networks. And I think, you know, how do you start? Listen, talk to your partners, listen to other organizations, bring in the practice, and look to see what you can plan and develop a plan to achieve that.
Yeah, Neil.
Yeah, I would agree with that, but I would challenge it a little bit in that this is not the old world. This is the changing game here. And if you want to be a community wealth builder, you're going to have to get, depending on what kind of organisation, if this is a street fight, and you're going to have to do things that you've not done before. So that means do things and then ask for permission. There's no time to waste. And if you're a small organisation, I'd be banging on the door of a housing association or another anchor and saying, look, let us in and give us a contract to do something. If you're a large housing association, you do whatever you can to be activist and get the community behind you. The old rules are off now. Do and then ask for permission or forgiveness after you've done it. No time to waste.
Thanks, Neil. And I think the kind of stat that Bill shared at the end was a really good example of why we should be doing that. Sian, anything to add from you? If not, I've got a very specific question from you that's coming from the audience.
No, I would just agree with Neil and Bill, really. I think for ourselves, and something that I've noticed, like I say, I've only been at Community Gateway for the last just over 12 months, it's that real commitment throughout the organisation to deliver that role as an anchor institute and the partnership working. I think it is key, really, in supporting the smaller partners, like Neil said, that need our support as a bigger player within the local area.
Nice.
Thanks, Sian. And a specific question for you now. The project that you talked about around food, is there any plans to hand that directly over to the community to deliver in the future? You talked a little bit about the kind of long-term direction. Where do you see that going?
Yeah, so the Purple Pantry, so our kind of food support at the moment. Yes, I think if we could make it sustainable, we could, and that's where my team are coming in. So our food support has been delivered by our tenancy support team, and because they're really linking in with those people that are in need. That's how we're looking now. How can we make it sustainable? In terms of the model, it's sustainable with the membership covers the food supplies, and our partnerships that we've utilised with Fair Share mean that we can deliver it at an effective cost. For us as an organisation, it's about getting people in to run and deliver it. So a team of volunteers that are trained up. We are looking at temporarily recruiting just for a period of time to enable us to do that. But yeah, it's definitely something we're looking to hand over to the community, really, to sustain and deliver. And it is based on one of our community centres at the heart of our main neighbourhoods.
Great, thanks, Sian. Someone's just bought me a cup of tea. I hope everyone is getting the same service as I am on this webinar, which is most excellent. A question now for you, Neil, I think perhaps in the first instance. How do we go from projects to systemic change? Is there something about moving our engagement with people from a customer framework to a citizen framework?
It's a good question. Two ways to think about that. Firstly, from the individual anchor institution, housing associations need to think about, and always have, that wider role, that relational role. And they're not a business with point-to-point transactions. They play a wider role. So it has to be, I think, to see their position as part of a system that relates virtuously to place and social progress, if you like. Broadly speaking, community wealth building is about how the totality, if you like, of the economic system operates to make the big change. And that's how, like in Birmingham and in Preston, it's important that housing associations are part of that bigger portfolio of anchor organisations who represent significant amount of wealth and economic activity, as well as policy when it comes to local authority. And they start to make the bigger changes to counteract those bigger forces which are extracting wealth at our later knots away from our places and from the pockets of our citizens. Thanks,
Neil. Bill, I've got a question which I'm going to direct at you now, because you've talked quite a lot about partnership working, and particularly with local authorities. Are there any magic ingredients to excellent partnership working that you've been able to identify through your work?
I don't think there's easy ones. I think they take some commitment and time. And I do. Neil's right. I was trying to stress that we need to act now. We need to get some action together. But I think there's resources and strength and ideas and capability in partnerships. So I think engage and understand what their pressures and requirements are. I think we've got to understand the pressures that councils are facing, for example, so that we can really work more effectively with them. I think if we identify that, we can actually achieve a lot more. But partnership work, it needs trust, time, and patience, and some effort, you know, to really get some joint actions identified. But I think there's equally a menu of areas where you can move more rapidly, fit, you know, the work around the community wealth building that you want to do. The examples I gave around community-led ones are pretty new stuff we've been doing this year, and we'll look to see how we drive that forward. So it's engagement, time and effort, not magic.
Given the
there's got to be trust and shared values within that. So,
given the crisis that we're in at the moment, Bill, and the sort of the urgency with which Neil has said we need to act, it does take time to build partnerships, and it takes time to build that trust. Do you think we're ever at a point now where we should just focus on the partnerships where we think that trust already exists and we can make more quick progress and give up on the ones that are not bearing fruit?
No, I mean, I think there's different views on that. I think if you look at your network as well as your partnerships, there's a lot of potential there. I mean, there's such a lot of great existing stuff there. There's Playship, there's networks, there's the community of interest. If you look at Greater Manchester, there's structures there that I think are fairly flexible and fluid. So if we work with those sort of patterns, I think the response to the coronavirus, including what Community Gateway have done, has demonstrated the capability to respond quickly that well-functioning partnerships can offer. That's what it's challenging those partnerships to do that. But we now have a track record of some innovation, flexibility and response to build on. We just need to make sure we spot it and bring it into this agenda. So I think this is the challenge area. Okay.
Thanks, Bill. And I think what's really been really powerful about today is the sort of practical examples that you've been able to give to bring this to life, and the structure that Neil has put behind it that helps people navigate around it. We've got a couple more minutes, so I'm just going to try and cover a couple more questions while we've got the time. I think, Sian, one for you that you've covered but useful to elaborate on, because you talked a bit about working with residents. Any tips for how you ensure genuine and meaningful co-creation in your approaches to community investment with residents?
Tips, yeah. So obviously we are a community gateway model, so that really puts us kind of at the heart. So our residents are involved throughout everything we do, and they genuinely, truly do have a say all the way through our everything. So I think in terms of being meaningful, it's just not being a tick box exercise, and that's something that I've really seen at Community Gateway. You know, it really does make a difference to the way we do things by listening to our tenants. So one thing that we've been doing over the past 12 months is really evolving the way that we work as a team to make sure more people can have a say. So really about developing opportunities and making sure you're really speaking to everybody concerned. So when co-creation comes up, it's not about a small sample of people that are telling you what you want to hear. It's actually really challenging some views. We've got a full tenant-led strategic body, our Gateway Central Committee, which sits underneath our board, and their role is to really challenge us when we are doing co-creation to say, no, actually, we don't think you've done enough yet. Go back and get us some more information, and then we will tell you when we think you've come to the right conclusion of what people need. So I think the main tips is just to make sure you are open and inclusive. Trying new things. We're using, like I say, digital platforms, traditional platforms. The team are, when they can be, community-based, you know, really grassroots, getting out and about and just talking to people and getting all that insight information from wherever we can, including our partners as well.
Great, thanks, Sian. I'm going to try and cheekily squeeze one more question in the time that we've got. Neil, I'm not sure if you were able to answer this, or it's something that you picked up through the development of the toolkit. This is a question from obviously quite a sizable housing association who's got 34,000 properties, and the question, if they wanted to focus on a smaller geographical area, how could they hone in on that? And is there any data that they should use that might help kind of focus on the sorts of communities or the smaller geographical areas to focus on? Neil, you talked a bit about the kind of unemployment stats and how they relate to some of your communities, but Neil, I don't know if you've got any, or Bill, if you've got any reflections on how, if you're really massive and perhaps quite geographically spread, how you might identify where you can make the biggest difference.
The short answer to that is that at Clares there is we have a diagnostic action plan process that looks across those 5 pillars and assesses where a place may be in terms of financial architecture, workforce, procurement spend and so on, and that has some quantitative elements to it as well as a qualitative understanding. So any housing association out there, I'm not touting for work, but it's to kind of drill down across those pillars and how are you and your actions making a difference to that particular neighbourhood across those 5 dimensions. And one of the easiest, of course, is procurement spend. How much of your spend is actually landing with indirectly through businesses to your supply chain with businesses in that locality and or workers within that locality. That's a simple thing you could do by looking at your supplier base.
Yeah, I'd add to that.
Yep.
I think in terms of some of the work that's being done across regions, it's plugging into the good practice. And don't forget, a lot of what partners and partnerships are reviewing and rethinking. They're facing the same things as us, so we can engage with some quite dynamic activities like Oldham with its social value review, thriving communities, etc.
Yeah.
If you look at what GMHP are doing around social value, there's some opportunities there to understand what's happening, to look at expertise and experience. So I think there's a partnership structure in a number of areas that we can connect with effectively. So that would be one way of identifying some best practice options.
If I can just finally plug, sorry to butt in, but in the report itself, there's some really handy questions that you would ask yourself in relation to the pillars. And that's almost like a sort of self-assessment exercise for yourself in terms of what you are as a housing association, where you're kind of delivering on community wealth building and your role as an anchor. Sorry for that final plug. But
not at all. This webinar is to inspire people and point them in the right direction. So I think the short answer to all of your questions is please go and have a look at the toolkit and think really carefully about how it applies to you. And there it is in all its glory. I'm going to reluctantly have to draw this to a close now because we're out of time. I just want to say an enormous thank you to our 3 fantastic speakers. So much to take from today's session. As I mentioned earlier, we'll be sending everyone an email in the next week or so, which will include a link to recording of the webinar as well as the slides, and you'll all receive a copy of the toolkit. So please don't worry, it's all in there and it'll all be there for you to draw on. If you want to access the toolkit immediately, do have a look at the web link my colleague has posted in the chat, so you can go and have a look at the toolkit today. As I mentioned earlier, we're also looking for partner housing associations which we can bring together to share best practice as part of a community of practice. If you're interested, please get in contact with your external affairs manager. The email address is eam@housing.org.uk to get involved. I hope you enjoyed today's webinar and took as much from it as I did. Before you go, we'd really appreciate it if you could answer this quick poll rating the webinar. And all of our other upcoming webinars are listed at housing.org.uk/event. All it remains for me to say is thank you so much for listening and joining us today.
thank you, Catherine, ably chaired. Thank you very much.
Yes.
Thank you.
Is everybody gone?
Don't know how it works.